Hey, I'm Beck and welcome to How I Made Trusting the Mystery from my latest EP called Pleasure Seeker, which is out on Second State Audio now with an amazing remix by the one and only Panpot. I chose to show you this track because it's actually one of the most simple tracks I've ever made, and I want to just show how easy it can be to make a track that still sounds good, I think, hopefully in your minds as well as mine. I came up with the melody just using my Complete Control keyboard here, which I put into Ableton via MIDI in the end, and I use VSTs such as Roland Clouds, TB3, the Jupiter, and even Ableton's own operator. And I called this track Trusting the Mystery because I wrote it last summer, and it was at a time where things were quite uncertain, and it was the beginning of our journey with this pandemic. So I wanted to give a positive note that, hey, we should trust the mystery, trust the unknown, just be absorbed in the feeling that we don't really know what's going to happen, but we're all here together, and one day we will have our industry resume. We will be dancing to this music. So let's still celebrate the unknown and let's get to it. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions or comments or feedback, please just write to me on my channels or in the video below. Hi everyone, and welcome to How I Made Trusting the Mystery. How should I start? Well, I just want to explain how the project is set up. Basically, I always do this with all my projects, and I always start by marking out exactly how long I want the track to be. I know that might be a strange thing to do at first, but I do put a marker on a finish line like I have done here. And I always start with the kick. So here I've quite interestingly layered 3 kicks together. It's not that I'm always usually doing that. I would say I do that a bit of the time. I'm layering 2 kicks at least, but this time there's 3. So I'll take you through to start with what I've done with the kick. So firstly, we've got kick number 1, which sounds a bit like this. Like that, as you can hear. And then I have kick number 2, which sounds like this. And then I have kick number 3. So just to go through these, as you can hear, I've got different frequency layers that are being used on each kick. And altogether it sounds like this. So the first one, I've just taken all of the bass, all of the sub-frequencies out, and I've dipped here where I had a frequency that I didn't really like the sound of, and I've raised the top to give it that extra punchiness. I'm actually just using Ableton EQs. I used to use Wave Audio, but now for simplicity, I actually just use mostly Ableton in the box stuff. So here's a trick that I often do, especially with bassy kicks, is I use the corpus. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of this, probably some of you, but it's a really great trick, and you can basically choose your sound. I usually put it to the membrane so that it doesn't take up too much sonically, and what I do is I tune it right down, because otherwise it would sound something like this. And what happens when I tune it down is it takes any of the sound out, and then depending how much dry or wetness I put, as you can hear, that adds quite a lot of low end. So I usually leave that literally on 1%, 1 to 2% max, but let's just give it 1% this time. And that just adds that extra bass layer to the kick. And as you can hear without it, it's a lot thinner. So that's a really great trick that I use for the kick. And then coming to the last kick, this is just the top end, and what I do here, a lot of the time, is I add the bit reduction on top just to give it that slight texture and that slight ringing sound, as you can hear. It can be as crazy as that, but I simply just, you can only hear it the tiniest bit, and that's what I like to do with my production. It's all about these really subtle, simple tricks to give those extra tiny layers of sound. So when all together, the kick is quite interesting. It sounds very full, I think, because I've got all of those different frequencies in there. Another thing that I've done, which I don't usually do, I've actually only ever done this on this track, is in certain areas I pitched the kick up and then I pitched it down again. So where I've marked green and yellow, it's pitched up slightly and then it goes back down to a lower pitch. So I've transposed that here just using this tool via Ableton. So that's the kick. Now potentially moving on to the bass. I often do that with toms. And I think that toms are a good way to add a bit of character to the bass, because you can, depending how much you EQ it, you can have a bit of the obviously sound of the timbre of the tom. So what I always do for this is I'm using Ableton Push, which I love, and I'm putting a drum rack on a MIDI channel, and then I'm just adding a ton of tom samples usually into the drum rack. And what I do is I literally I have a very big library of samples and they are stored here, and I would literally just search tom, and I'm often just dragging them all in, so that the reason why I do that is I can easily audition in the piano roll exactly how it's going to sound. And I've chose this tom bucket sound. Let me just single it out so you can hear it and loop that. So now you can hear it with the kick. But I would just go through all of them and find one until I like the sound of it. Pretty simple really, I guess everyone does that. And then I usually work with short loops, and I will change the pattern and see like what sounds good, subtle differences between the notes. Here, this is quite a playful pattern. I'm usually using something a lot more simple in the low end, but here I went for something a bit more complex. But the rest of the track is super simple, and that's why I've actually chosen to talk about this track today, to show you just how simple a track can be. It doesn't need to be having all these crazy production effects and this huge complicated production line. It can also just be, okay, that's a sine wave, this is a tom as a bass line, that's a kick, and that's the track, but it sounds good. Hopefully you think so anyway. So with the tom, what do I do to it? Let's see. So obviously here I love the sampler in Ableton, and I also use here, I can just change, where that starts or where it finishes. I'm often like transposing using the push, but here I haven't actually affected the tom at all in question. It is just left as this. The EQ, I've taken all of the high end and some of the low end there, so that the kick, the bassiness of kick that I added on the corpus just feels that low end. I've sidechained it just to make sure that there's nothing interfering with the kick, and we get that real clear bounciness with the kick and the bass coming through. I've added these are actually free, so please go get them. It's called AbleTunes, and they just do a series of knobs, one knob, and I find the drive really cool. So this is without it, and this is with it, and it's just really easy way to add more character to the sound. Something I discovered quite lately as well is this drum bus, just via Ableton again. Just again adds so much character and pushes all the frequencies, and there's just a lot that you can do within there. And I add that to a lot of my drums, especially if I'm grouping. in more complicated tracks, especially if I'm grouping drums together, I'll use the drum bus to push all the frequencies so that they sound like glued together and similar. I'm not usually using it so much just on single channels. As usual, though, I do use a saturator, just the Ableton one, which I'm usually using the soft sine color because I think it's like a little bit less harsh than the others, and then I'll just use the drive wet and the dry wet and the drive to make sure that it's not sounding too saturated, because I find that sometimes you can just whack a saturator on everything, and that's actually like not the best way to go about it. You need to just use it a little bit here and there just to add that warmness to the sounds. So I'm just going through this one by one, and you can see I always arrange my tracks this way, where I have the kick, the bass, and then I usually do the hi-hat or 16th notes and a regular hi-hat, and then I will do the synths after that, and I always have everything in the same way. I'm sure you all have your tips and tricks as well, but it just is familiar to me, and then I know, okay, exactly where the kick is always at the top, and then the hi-hat is there, and it's just a layered kind of way to visualize my tracks as well. So here, this is actually just a sample. Sometimes I'm using the 16th shaker. Sometimes I'm using the TR8S to do 16th notes, so I can just open and close the filters and play with some effects actually on the machine, and then I'll like record it in. But for this purpose, Florian Meindl has a really great sample pack, and sometimes when I'm really in the flow and like I'm more concentrating on the synth or other parts of the tracks, I just like whack a hi-hat loop in there with shakers and something a bit more complex than a regular hi-hat, with the aim that I would then go and replace it later. But sometimes I don't replace it because I think, hey, that sounds really good. I don't think there's any shame using samples and loops sometimes, as long as it's not your whole track. I think there is, it can be a great way to quickly listen to what things sound like as a full track. So I want to encourage people, like, don't worry about that, because I'm not. So what have I done here? I've taken out a bit of resonance that I heard in the EQ, and I've compressed it so that it's kind of bouncing. Otherwise it just would go very straight like that, but I like how it's kind of coming in and out with the kick, and then it just adds this extra rhythm just through the side chain. Here I'm using a wide noise erosion with quite a bit of it actually, just to give more texture. Again, the drum bass and a warmer saturation here with a sinoid fold. Again, that just adds some movement. I think it's all about movement, really. Like, you don't want things to just be super static, and it's best if you can add as much movement into the elements and the individual sounds as possible. So then moving on to the regular hi-hat, and what do these sound like together? I recorded this one in the TR8S, and I just opened the cutoff on one of them like that, and very simply have just taken off all the low end frequencies and added some saturation once again. Quite a bit actually here, 73% dry and wet. Well, wet I should say. So what does that all sound like together? Okay. So moving on now to the synth part of the sound of the track, which is exciting. I mainly made it using Roland Cloud TB3, but I also use Ableton's operator. I actually am a sucker for a sine wave. I love the simplicity of the sound of a sine wave, and it's not too aggressive like a saw. It's just very pure, and I just like the almost roundedness of the sound in a way. And what I do, because I'm not musically trained, but I have tips and tools in Ableton, obviously, to help me find out the notes, because by just my ear, I don't know that myself. So I use the MIDI scale tool here, and I will just basically go to MIDI effects, scale, and then here, of course, you have all the different scales, and I'll just pick one or two that I know are good for techno, like the Dorian mode, for example. And I'll drag it here, and the track is in F sharp, so I will put it into F sharp, and then I know that whatever I play will be fitting to the rest of the track, which is, yeah, it's really handy for me and allows me to write more like kind of complex melodies easily, because it's just all going to be in tune. But here I've used operator for this, and I've just mixed in a different sine wave. And although, like, operator is like, you know, it's, I could use something much more exciting, but it is what it is, and it has all the functions there. It might not be the most amazing looking synth, or as fun as using like a plugin or VST, but you know what, it really like does the job, and I like to use it. I find it easy, and I like how you've got 4 levels here that I can mix the different frequencies and sounds in. Yeah. So then I've EQ'd this quite a bit, because it's quite a resonant, sharp sound. And just to hear, that's the sound I've taken out. And to find like these sounds, I will just like, that's also not sounding too good, so I will basically find that, and then I will just take the gain down. Another thing that I use all the time, which is just free for everyone, and I'm sure most people know about this as well, but are the Valhalla Shimmer reverbs, and these are amazing. I love this one, especially for long tails, and I add it to so much, or any like kind of pads or like long synth sounds, anything that I want to have that really wide room sound on, I'm using this, and it's free, and I just whack it on and it always sounds good. So the mix is quite high here, and I usually play with the size of it. I also have reverb send and delay send on each track. So this is a really easy way to just hear how I would have reverb on, and these are just, yeah, the A reverb and B delay here. And I have this in every project template, so I can just add that on really quickly. But yeah, sometimes it needs a little extra reverb, so I'll then do that on each individual track, and then voila, that's what it sounds like. Pretty simple as well. You know what? I will show you this, but the sound since I opened the project has actually dropped out, because reason, I'm going to tell you and give you some feedback, but it's not great, that the sounds do drop out sometimes if it's in MIDI. Luckily I remember what it was. Here we go. So yeah, I'm using the Reason Rack plugin, which I actually love. I have never actually used the full Reason, but a friend showed this to me and said, hey, you can use it in Ableton as well. And it's amazing because you can stack synthesizers on top of each other and effects, and you can also flip the rack, and you have like a modular side to it, so it's amazing. It's really powerful. I'm using it a lot. So here I've got like an off an offbeat like bass hit, which just adds an extra element to the mix, which I really like. So, on to the main melody. What have I done here? So, again, most things are made within Ableton, as you can see. Like, it's not, I haven't recorded in audio, although I do that a lot. I do have a lot of hardware here. But sometimes I'm just like up for doing just VST MIDI stuff within Ableton. I find it a bit less fiddly than recording in hardware. And it just depends what mood I'm in. So I will show you. I really was so happy with this melody, and yeah, it's probably like one of the coolest ones I've written. I just love the subtle change. It's so simple, but still I love it. I wrote it using my Complete Control keyboard from Native Instruments, and I just routed that to this TB3 from Roland Cloud. I must say, since Roland brought out these cloud VSTs, it has kind of changed my life in terms of production. I do absolutely love it. Takes a while to load and chugs the CPU, but it's kind of totally worth it. So instead of using the sequencer in here, I find it a bit fiddly, so I often just like don't use that and I just use my own MIDI. I'm often using the presets here, so there's this overdrive and pan delay square, which I love. Otherwise you've got other sounds, but I love this one. It really still has a lot of the sine in it, and I think it complements the sound that I made in Operator. So yeah, that's really great. I can't recommend the cloud stuff enough. So yeah, it's really great, the Roland Cloud stuff, and go get it. It is amazing. I can't recommend it enough. Next, Jupiter. Again, this is a sound I'm using in most of my tracks, and I love this pad. You'll hear it in most of my tracks, and I think it's good to have these kind of signature sounds that you're always using so that you can really kind of, how am I going to say this? You can have your signature sounds that people recognize. Oh, that's a track from BEC, or, you know, these sounds that you love become your trademark and your thing. So I really encourage using, frequently some sounds that you love. So here, what have I done to this? I've done quite a lot here on the effects chain. And this is from, one day I would love to have my own Jupiter, but yeah, this is the one that I am using for now, because yeah, it's pretty expensive to get the full synth, and also a bit rare these days. So I have sounds I've created in here which I've saved, but I also have this JMB full pad which I love. And here I've taken out a lot of the resonant frequencies that are kind of a bit too piercing, and I've done this classic and very easy pan to the sides. Using the delay, which I'm sure that a lot of people know as well. So you basically pan the left side to 1 millisecond and the right side to 10 milliseconds. You put the feedback to 0 and the dry to wet to 100, and it just spreads the sound right to the edge of the stereo image. I have compressed it a little bit, but not too much, because I don't want the pad to be noticeably like kind of wavering on top of the kick. It needs to just have this subtle bounce, which you don't really hear. I'm using an auto filter to kind of just bring the sound in And one cool thing I like to do with pads is just a very subtle auto pan. So there's only 19% on the amount of this, and it's a slow rate, but over a long time this is just slowly panning and slightly panning the speakers. I've added a long reverb tail here, and yeah, I'm also sometimes using the spectrum to double check all of the set, like the notes here are like F sharp, although of course it is because that's what I put it in as the MIDI, but yeah, it's just to double check that it's all sounding all in sync and good with each other. And then as it gets closer towards the break, I just go up an octave, and then I slightly change the notes just to add this kind of tension before it gets to the break, and then it leads in like. So the last thing in my tracks, the last element is the white noise, which I'm usually using samples for, and I'm just using subtle builds just in a few places. I don't like to use too much white noise, so it's never going to sound like like it's too like consuming of the whole sound, but it adds that build and that tension. And I've also sine chained this. Added my favorite reverb and also taken out any of the bass. Yeah, maybe now I can talk about like the way that the track is kind of arranged. So it's just got like super simple again. We've got a double kick when a change is gonna come. And the synth starts just by kind of leaking in with two notes. But then it then has these two parts of the sequence. And with the Jupiter, I think it sounds amazing, even though it's just so simple. And just this ride on the top, which again I brought in using a drum rack. And I just simply EQ'd it, some compression, sidechain erosion, and vinyl distortion from Ableton. And then as this gets further towards the break, I just add reverb on some of the elements. I open the cutoff of the synths, and I take the kick out completely in the break, just to like really give this euphoric sense where the dance floor is gonna just stop and everyone's gonna be like, whoa, it's maybe like a clapping hands moment or something. And then again, the elements come back in. Yeah, it's probably one of my most simple tracks ever. 15 elements, that's including 3 kicks, so there's actually only 12 separate sounds in here. But sometimes I think that's cool, like, it doesn't have to be overdone all the time, and I think there's beauty in simplicity, so... So yeah, that's it. My tracks aren't always as simple as this, but I wanted to show you this one to show how simple they can be. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Thank you.